Yeah, it's good to be back up here on the stage again a lot. This is not just about the Browns, but I love seeing all the people out there in the Browns uniforms or Browns hats. Because this is a very special year that we got going here. This is the 80th anniversary of the pinnacle of baseball. As she said, St. Louis versus St. Louis. I mean, for the best baseball town in America, this is the high point. Both our teams played each other in the World Series. And that's what we're going to talk about today. But the other thing, when I talk about the best baseball town, it's not just about winning. You know, the Cardinals, next to the Yankees, are the second best, won the most World Series pennants as well in the National League. We have this fan club. It's our 40th anniversary for a team that has not played in 71 seasons. And people come. You know, a few weeks ago, we filled Gateway Grizzlies, Browns night at the Grizzlies, where we dress them up after we pick a player in their retro uniforms. Next week, if you didn't get a flyer, see me. We'll have close to 300 people at the Missouri Athletic Club with talking about Browns history and other baseball history. We got Mike Veck, the son of Bill Veck, coming in to hear all the crazy things he and his dad did. You know, one of them is Disco Demolition Night. Remember when they blew up all? Well, to make it even bigger and better, I got Dave Phillips, who's a friend of mine, the famous umpire, who just happened to be the crew chief that day and just happened to forfeit the game against the White Sox and Mike Veck. You know, also threw out Earl Weaver more than any other umpire. But great stories. Dan McLaughlin is going to MC it for us. And I got about a half dozen to a dozen former Cardinals coming just to hang out, be with you guys, sign autographs, whatever. So next Tuesday. And the other thing is, I do not believe we should ever charge $100, $150 like a lot of these things to come to these events. $40 for members, $55 for non-members. So get the bargain, become a fan club member. We got over 700 active people, and that's why we're the best. And why? The New York Giants, remember when they played New York? Brooklyn Dodgers played in Brooklyn. Philadelphia A's, Boston Braves, they don't have anything. They do not have they got to turn that off over there. They do not have fan club like we do, active, and we participate and come and talk to you. So this is very important, and I thank you for coming. So let's get on with the show. 1944 World Series, American League Browns versus St. Louis Cardinals. You know, epic. But first you got to understand a few things, like what was the life like in 1944? But when I go first, you know, I always got to talk about, this is, I think, the best logo in baseball, not just because, you know, I'm with the fan club. It's a story within a story that many people don't know. I mean, yeah, the Cardinals are really cool, the birds on the bat and how Branch Rickey did that with the ladies up in Ferguson. They did the Browns thing. I mean, excuse me, the Cardinals at a luncheon, and he liked it, and it became the thing across the bat. You know, the Yankees, what a legacy, but it's an NY. I'm up in Cooperstown speaking multiple times, and I'll say this thing about the logo, and all the people from New England, the Red Sox, goes, "We got a great logo." A red sock? Come on, we can do better than that. You know, this is a story within a story. This thing you guys recognize just up the street, right? The apotheosis. Until the late 60s, that was the symbol of St. Louis. Not a cardinal bird. Louis IX. See the 8 stars? The 8 teams in the American League. The 9 bars? The 9 men on the field. It was created by Phyllis Sievers, not related to Roy Sievers, in a contest in 1936 when Donald Barnes bought the team. We're getting a lot of back feed. I don't know if that's bothering you or not, but again, you can kind of see this lost legacy of this greatness from this history of the Browns that we refuse to let go away. We are not, maybe you've seen the films that we put together on PBS. They were showing them here in this last month. You know, the team baseball forgot, it's not forgotten anymore, thanks to people like you who 71 seasons after they played are still showing up for these things. So, you know, there's a common thread throughout this whole story of the Browns versus Cardinals. The guy's name's Branch Rickey, a name you all know, right? Yeah, Branch Rickey. You know, the one thing about everything for the Browns, they took the wrong road. There's a lot of forks in their history if you study it or seen it, and they're always on the wrong side. Branch Rickey was a baseball genius. He could find talent and knew how to develop talent. Now, he was a little bit of an egomaniac, too, on the side. You know, him and God were both up there at the top. In his mind, I'm not sure which was higher. But, and he does have a career of going places because he kind of wears out his welcome. But he started with the Browns. He was a player in 1905, 06, came back after the war, played a little bit. He was a catcher. He holds the record for most steals against a catcher in a game, 13. You can look it up. We got the newspaper articles and all that. But he was a manager with the Browns, and then he became a GM. And he did not get along with the Browns owner, Philip de Gaspee Ball, who his great-grandson, Mr. Ball's great-grandson, is in our audience, along with a bunch of members of our fan club and our board of directors on the fan club are here. And Ricky wanted to build the farm system because pretty much up till that time, everything was free agency, okay? He wanted to develop young talent, sign them to contracts, and hold them, because they couldn't compete against Boston and New York and Philadelphia where the big money is. So they didn't agree with that. So Mr. Ricky left, and just 5 blocks up, because Sportsman's Park was owned by the Browns. They played. The Cardinals played up at Vandeventer and Natural Bridge. It was called Robeson Field. So 5 blocks. Ricky goes up those 5 blocks. Sam Braden had just brought the Cardinals, says, I want to win. I want to build a farm system. I will make winners of these players. Braden says, do it. Browns don't do it. Cardinals do it. So he is then the manager of the Cardinals from 1919 to 1925, the GM from 1917 really to 1942. And he puts together what becomes the Cardinal powerhouse. The Browns, not so much success as the Cardinals. The Cardinals' success was really branded by Branch Rickey. What if de Gaspee Ball had let him stay and build the farm system? Would that have changed everything? We would have everybody in these orange and brown hats around here instead of red. But, we had this great slogan for the Browns. First in booze, first in shoes, last in the American League. So over the last 6 months or so, there's some authors from Washington, I've written these books, and so you always got these groups. So they were trying to do something on the Senators who like to say this was theirs, First in war, first in peace, last in the American League. But we have proven it was, in 1910, it was created here in St. Louis, finally, how it came out of a contest here in St. Louis, this slogan here. So we take it with pride. But, we talk about Ricky and what he did. We could talk about all the World Series. He started developing this farm system in 1920. 1926, they go to the World Series. They beat the Yankees. 28, they go and lost to the Yankees. And then 30, they lose to Connie Mack's great athletic team. But then the next year, they beat them. And then we're in 1934, and Dizzy Dean, the Gas House Gang, and all that, Great series there. They beat the Tigers in 7. 42, they beat the Yankees. 43, they lost to the Yankees. So we're just set up to 1944. You don't see any Browns in the World Series here, even though the Browns were the better team originally from the time they came. We'll talk about that in a second. The National League was formed in 1876. That's when the National League was formed. The American League won't come until 1901, as you see there. We actually had a team in that first iteration of the American League in 1876. It was called the Brown Stockings. They lasted 2 years, and they got kicked out of the National Leagues because of gambling and game-fixing issues. Gambling was prevalent in those days. Seems to be going a trend back to that with all this ballot voting on gambling and whatever. But they got kicked out. But it's also, they had to name the Browns Stockings. The Browns is this thing like a name like cat with 9 lives. It just keeps appearing. In 1892, they joined the National League, again a second team. And I will actually say it was a third team because that team there was an American Association, kind of an offshoot of a major league level team. Chris Von Der Eye, is that a name you all heard of before? He ran that American Association team. They were the best in the 10-year history, 1881 to up to like 1892. They were the best team in the American Association. Even the National League tried to put a team in here in 1884 called the Maroons. You ever heard of them? They played 2 years in 1884, and they folded financially because they could not keep up with Von der Eye's American Association Brown stockings. You know why? The American Association games had more action. There was more speed, running around, not this staid, trying to get hits and move. But more importantly, they had games on Sunday, and they sold liquor. So everybody went to American Association games. So if you can't beat them, join them. And that's how the Browns, they shortened their name to Browns, and they came and joined the National League in 1892. Today we know them as the Cardinals, but in 1892 to 1899, in 1898, they were the Browns. So it's very confusing when you try to teach this to the history to people that the Cardinals in those first year was known as the Browns. In 1899, when the Robesons bought the team and were looking for new images, they changed them to the Perfectos, and they also changed their uniforms to the next year that lovely shade of cardinal red. And thereafter, we know them as the Cardinals. And then a few years later, Ricky finds out about the cardinal birds in the luncheon flower arrangements, and they put the birds on the bat just like that. So that gets you to 1900. 1901, the American League is formed. There's no St. Louis team in the American League, but even though we're the fourth largest city in America and one of the big business centers of America, they make the decision in 1902 to move the Milwaukee Brewers, a name we know now. Unfortunately, we're always looking up at Milwaukee Brewers these days. But they moved the Milwaukee Brewers to St. Louis, and they adopt the name the Browns. So you can look at all this legacy of Browns being baseball teams. So they come in here, and they will stay until 1954 when they move to Baltimore. And all you Browns fans saying, oh, I wish they were here. I hate it. Why'd they move? My punchline joke is blame Nancy Pelosi, because everybody seems to blame Nancy for everything, it seems. Her dad was the mayor of Baltimore and was deep in getting the team over to Baltimore. So, poor Nancy, she gets blamed for everything. So that's just a little background history that we're starting to get to 1944. And through 1902, when they got here to the mid-20s, the Browns were the better team. And the St. Louisans rallied to them. The Cardinals, they just weren't winners. Their great years of the American Association aged out. Things changed. Von der Eye was not spending the money. That's why he was going to have to sell. St. Louis is a Brownie town till the mid-20s. And the 1922 Browns are one of baseball's best. They had this great team led by the guy in the red circle, George Sisler, one of the greatest men to ever play the game. Great ball player. But he's also probably the most forgotten great ball player. He was in that original Hall of Fame class picture you always see there with them all lined up there in front of Cooperstown. They were a very, very good team. Unfortunately, they lost on the last game of the season, got beat by the Yankees, lost by a run. Sisler had gotten hurt on September 10th, couldn't play those last full weeks at full capacity, even though he was batting .424, because he couldn't lift his arm. His shoulder had trouble. But I also, see that guy in the light blue up here? That guy there? I put him on here because how many of y'all played baseball in St. Louis, right? Got a lot of people. You played on his field, but you may not know it. This is the guy. Heiny Miney, I heard someone say. That's Heiny Miney, a pitcher for the Browns in 22. He'd go to Pittsburgh and have his better years, but Heiny Miney Field, what is all this Heiny Miney stuff about? I mean, actually, when I was writing the book, my wife could hear me talking, or when we were making the movies about Heiny Manouche, Heiny Miney, all these Heineys. Yeah, we had a lot of Heineys in the Browns. She said, what is it? It's German for Henry. And she, oh. But the Browns, I think, had the most Heineys. And you can take that any way you want. So that is the St. Louis Browns. They were a great team. George Sisler, 1920, 407, 22. Between 20, 21, and 22, his average was over 400. Great. He collected over 200 hits 6 times. Very few guys can even get 200 hits today, and they play more games. He was the first ever MVP in baseball in 1920, the very first ever MVP. Not only that, the Browns, They had the first ever American League Rookie of the Year, Roy Sievers, in 1949, a local boy from Beaumont High School. And the reason I'm telling you is just giving you a little background because you all know the Cardinal history, right? It's everywhere. And just like Ruth Sisler was a pitcher, Walter Johnson was an idol. He signed to be a pitcher, beat Walter Johnson twice, but he was too valuable hitting, and so like they converted to players. Trivia, you guys like trivia? All right, here's a great trivia question. Next time you have a trivia, put this question in. You'll be the only one who can get it. What's the best baseball hitting outfield in history? St. Louis Browns. This is the only team that had the same three players 5 straight years hit over 300. Their average was over 330, but the only baseball team. Kenny Williams, Baby Doll Jacobson, and man, you want to study baseball history, go back, wait till you see the names these guys have. Baby Doll and Johnny Tobin. They would have been 6 years, but Johnny Tobin hit 299 the 6th year. So who knows what it could have been. So that is the only outfield in baseball to do that. And they had 3 players that were collected over 200 hits. They were powerful. Their pitching wasn't as good, but they were a good team. But Brownie Blues, no pennants. They get to this very good team, but there's a team in New York that's got a guy named the Babe. And we know what Babe Ruth did in the 20s and 30s. And New York prevailed. And you know, what would have happened if Sisler had not gotten hurt that year? The Browns would have been in the World Series. Maybe it would have won. It would have changed things. So that's what's happened on the Brownie side. And over on the Cardinal side, winners, 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 winners. As I said a little earlier, you know, you had the Hornsby era of the 20s. They were in the World Series, as we saw a minute ago, in the 26 and 28. Hornsby didn't last long with the Cardinals. He didn't last very long anywhere managing. He has this history telling the owners what he thought. You know, he kicked Sam Braden out of his clubhouse. Said, "This is my clubhouse. This is my team." And Mr. Braden reminded him a few days after they won the World Series whose team and who it really was, because Braden shipped him off to New York. And he stayed there about a year, then went up to Boston, stayed about a year, then he eventually went to the Cubs and stayed really a year and a half. And that second year, they won the pennant, and the players voted him 0 share. Mr. Hornsby was a great hitter, but not a good manager. Then we went to Gabby Street's team, and with Frankie Frisch and Dizzy Dean in 34, you know, because they were in the pennants in 30, 31, 34, the Gas House Gang. And then we come to the Swifties of the 1940s. I mean, this was a tremendous team, and I'll talk about it a little bit more. Billy Southworth Swifties, unbelievable team. Some of the best in baseball history. And these are all the programs from that. You can see, so you don't see any Browns programs anywhere, right? Because they haven't won a pennant yet. So we're in 1944. That's just a quick little baseball history of St. Louis. 1944. What was it like in 1944? We just got out of the Great Depression. You know, all the poverty, all the rationing, all the depth of not a very good life during the 1930s. We're just getting out in the late 30s. Things are looking up, maybe. War's been raging in Europe since 1938. You know, German invasions across Europe, Japanese aggression in the Pacific. So, good times are here again. Not so much. We're faced with struggles again. And so for the last 2 years, starting really in 42, because Pearl Harbor happened in December of 41, the United States has been fighting wars on 2 fronts. That's what we're faced with as we come into 1944. The home front, once again, there's rationing of food, tires, gasoline, everything you can think of. People were working long, long hours in factories supporting the war. Men are off, and women too, are off in the fields of battle. And it's just a very difficult time. You know, we forget that too often, that some of our parents and grandparents, what they went through in the 30s and 40s, as opposed to what we've had, you know, these last 3 decades. And the Allied forces, this is the biggest thing. When baseball opened in April 1944, we had not landed at Normandy yet. There was even doubts, would the Allies win? You know, would countries like England capitulate, and and those that he had already occupied all across, could they even win? It was in big doubt. So there wasn't a rosy picture anywhere that this was going to happen. It was not the best of times, just to summarize 1944. But there was a premonition about what was to come. And this is when you write films, you write books. This is the stuff that I call them Harry Carey moments, Holy cow! I mean, here you are, you're doing research, right? It'd been 40 years since the St. Louis World's Fair. We got the big exhibit upstairs. 40 years. Okay? And America is singing, meet me in St. Louis, Louis, meet me at the fair, right? Judy Garland's film came out in 1944. That was one of the top records. Meet me in St. Louis, Louis. But baseball fans? No, not so much meet me at the fair. Meet me at Grand and Dodier. That was the place, Sportsman's Park. So that's pretty iconic. Like, whoa, they're all singing. The baseball world is going to meet in the fall in St. Louis, Louis at Grand and Dodier. And then the #1 grossing film, the big Academy Award-winning film of the season, Going My Way with Bing Crosby. Holy cow, what does Bing wear throughout the film? A Browns jacket. You can go up, see one like it just right up. If we're going to keep that memorabilia display open because hopefully you've learned some things. You want to go back and read some things and look. We'll keep it open for another hour after this is done. But look at Bing. He's up here in a Browns sweatshirt and all that. You can see this jacket like that back there. The world was becoming indoctrinated with St. Louis and the St. Louis Browns as we approach fall 1944. So what did wartime baseball mean? Players were being drafted or working in defense factories. It means you're going to go work in this factory making cannons or torpedoes or some of the things. You were drafted into war going off to the fronts. DiMaggio, Feller, Greenberg, Rizzuto, just to name a few, they're all gone. You remember the Cardinals played the Yankees in the 1943 World Series? And in 1944, the first 8, the starting 8 in the lineup, all of them were gone into the military. So it was a different brand of baseball. And Major League lineups were filled with 4Fs, or players who've been out of baseball, or part-time players who could work on the weekends. 4Fs, you have, if you weren't familiar, if you're too young, the 4F, you had a medical issue or a family personal issue, and you got out of having to serve. But excuse me?
No, bone spurs, I'm sorry.
Bone spurs were, somebody might even be talking about that today in Vietnam. But we're talking baseball. But anyway, these guys had 4Fs. We had people working long hours. Bill DeWitt Sr., father of Bill DeWitt Jr., the CEO of the Browns, he was a long-time president, general manager of the Browns. He would even own the team for several years. His son, Bill Jr., was a bat boy. And it was Bill Jr.'s bat boy uniform that Eddie Goodell wore on August 19, 1951, when the 3'7", my belt's right at 3'7", so when I go into schools and talk, it's always my belt. That's how big Eddie Goodell was. It was Bill's uniform he wore, with the 1/8 on the back. And then afterwards, they asked, what happened to it? Well, we put it in the hall closet. I wore it out in Halloween that year. My sister wore it the next 2 years. One of the most priceless pieces of baseball memorabilia became a Halloween costume. Unbelievable, whoa. And so Bill Sr. was this brilliant man of creating this Browns team, grading all these 4Fs, or guys who had been out of baseball a year or two, saying, come on, you got one more year, come on back. Or he would look at a guy like Denny Galehouse, you're working in Cleveland in a factory, a war plant, but you're off on the weekends, and we're going to be in Chicago, we're going to be in Detroit, so you're going to play on these weekends. And then he'll find somebody else who was with him, and he would get them to join the teams. And he architected this great Brownies team. And that's how he put it together. A great, he got General Manager of the Year, Executive of the Year in 1944. He would do the same thing in 1961 for the Reds and built the Reds team, and then the great Reds teams of the 70s before he kind of, the people in Cincinnati kind of fell out of love when he owned the team and ran it. because he traded Frank Robinson for Milt Pappas. It was kind of like being on the receiver end of Ernie Broglio for Lou Brock. Frank Robinson, great Hall of Famer. But anyway, nighttime baseball. Immediately after Pearl Harbor, in the first weeks of January, Franklin Roosevelt came out. Because, see, in World War I, they actually stopped the season the 1 year. Stopped it early. Roosevelt came out with what we call the green light letter. He says, you have the green light to play ball. I want baseball at major league level. Now, they cut down the minor leagues, and that's how we got the league of our own, women's. But I want Major League Baseball because you're going to work long, hard hours. And I want you to come home, because remember, there's no TVs, computers, iPhones, iPads, any of that. I want you to come home and your family just sit there, listen, and relax with baseball. Baseball is going to get us through this. And that's what's this green light. So you see all these pictures of the 40s people watching a radio. You know, they're all sitting in the family room. There's this big radio about this big, you know. They're watching it. But they listened to baseball. They were home relaxing, and it got us through the war effort. So here we go. This is the mentee and the mentor. Branch Rickey, as I said, worked for the Browns and then the Cardinals. Bill DeWitt Sr., Bill's father, this is his brother, Charlie. He was a secretary of the Browns. DeWitt actually worked first with Rickey for the Cardinals, and he started rising up. And Rickey, being the egomaniac he was, started to feel a little threatened by this guy. He said, you need to go work for the Browns. They could use some help. So he made sure he got him out of the way. And that's how Bill Sr. got over to the Browns. Rickey moved him over there. So that's who they are, the mentee and the mentor. And, you know, a lot of Rickey's greatness fell upon Bill DeWitt Sr., and some of that's been passed down to Junior and the third, yes?
Is that a picture when they're with the Cardinals, or the DeWitts
No.
are already with the Browns?
They're with the Browns.
Yeah.
They're just having a meeting there. I mean, because that was like in the 1910s when they were together with the Cardinals. But that's in the, I would say, late 30s, early 40s.
You know what they're meeting about?
I don't know. Maybe they were looking at the racetrack things. There's a lot of, I don't know. But there's the picture. Anyway, this is Sportsman's Park from the outside. How many went to Sportsman's Park? Yeah, a lot of people here. Grand and Dodier. Just so you know, Grand ran right here. Then this was Sullivan in left field. Spring came along the third base, and Dodier ran along first base. And it was a very deep park out here. Center field is very deep. You see how it jets back? The flagpole was actually on the field. And there's the iconic YMCA out there. Downtown's about right over here. But, you know, the biggest thing was this 11-foot wall and then a 26-foot screen that went up to the roof. It was called Fenway West because you had to really just hit it out onto the Grand Avenue. And if you could, like Babe Ruth, you could hit it out on the Grand Avenue and put it in the hole of the Wells Chevrolet across the street showroom. But that's the other reason Stan Musial only hit 475 home runs, because all he kept doing was banging it off the screen for doubles. And when he retired, he was like so much a bigger lead of doubles in his career. Two iconic things. One, that screen I talked about that ran from here all the way down, this section was called the Pavilion. The African Americans were designated to stay in there originally until May 5th, 1944. We were the last stadium in the major leagues to be segregated, no longer be segregated. It was integrated. The African Americans could sit where they wanted. But it was also Bill Veeck, our buddy Bill Veeck, when he bought the Browns. He came up with the idea. I mean, he had a lot of ideas between Eddie Goodell, grandstand manager. So we're going to lower the screen when the Browns are at bat, and we'll raise the screen when the Browns are in the field. And he was implementing it, and then Major League Baseball said, "You're doing what?" And they stopped it. The other thing was this field. I mean, look at this field. It looks kind of rough, right? Marty Marion used to call it the worst field in major leagues because when the Cardinals weren't there, the Browns were on. Because in 1920, Robeson Field, where the Cardinals played, it burned down. It was the last wooden major grandstand in the major leagues. Again, Ricky, now he's with the Cardinals. It looked like the Cardinals would have to move. They were bad, as I said. Where are they going to play? They don't have a lot of money. Do they have to move out of town? No. Ricky goes back to his old boss, Phillips the Catsby Ball, and makes a deal. We will be your tenants. We'll pay you this amount of money. Unfortunately, Ball didn't divide by 30, and it wasn't a whole lot of money. The Cardinals kept putting that money back into the farm system. He could have kicked and said, no, you can't come in. But they had this arrangement where Browns on the road, Cardinals at home. Cardinals on the road, Browns at home. Which meant the field never got to really be saturated, hydrated, rest. Everybody was playing there every day in the heat of the summer. Just tore it apart. It was a very hard field to play infield on. Marty Marion, who said all that, he would be the 1944 MVP. Yes, sir.
Did Potter really throw a pickoff to first base that went out on the...
We'll talk about that. Game 2. Hang in there, buddy. It wasn't a pickoff, though. You're close, but not so close. But he is involved. We'll get to that, and I'll even show you a picture of it. So anyway, this is the Cardinal team. Don't they look classy? I look at this picture, compare it to the Browns a minute. They just look, I won't say smug, but they like confident, right? Clean uniforms, looking good, smiles on their face. Like, we're a pretty good ball club, you know? You've only won the pennant 2 years in a row, and you're heading into this one. But that is the Cardinals, and everybody goes, well, there he is, there, Stan the man. There's Marty Marion. We'll talk about these guys here in a second, but there they are. They just look confident. Okay, well they should be. And here's their starting lineup. The pitching: Mark Cooper, Max Lanier, Ted Wilkes, lefty Harry Burkeen, Walker Cooper, Mark Cooper's brother, manager Billy Southworth down here. Interesting. Stan played right field throughout that time. He spent more time at first base in his career. He played more games at first base than any other position, but we remember him in his later years all being out in left field. But in the World Series, Stan is going to play first base. The Cardinals were the cream of the National League. Their wins in the 20s, their wins in the 30s, their wins now in the 40s. And this was the third year in a row that they've won the pennant in 1944. And the third year in a row, they won over 100 games. Look at that. 42, 106 games, 105 games, 105 games. Pretty impressive team. And remember, they're winning 105 games in a 154-game series, not the 162-game series, excuse me. So they are very, very good. Now, the other thing is the attendance in 44 is 461,000. Some of it's hampered by the war effort, people having to work long hours and things. But really, between 400 and 1 million is all baseball. You go look at all the teams in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s. This 3 million people attendance thing, that's first really happened in the early 1980s. It was not the norm. So this is not out of line to have 461,000. Busch Stadium, Sportsman's Park, I can't call it Busch Stadium. Sportsman's Park was not that, it was like a 35,000 seat ballpark. So this is their third straight pennant. Mark Cooper was the MVP in 1942. This up-and-coming guy named Musial was 1943's MVP, and Marty Marion would be the MVP in 1944. Musial hit 347, hopped 336, and Walker Cooper, the catcher, 317. Brother Mort Cooper won 22 games, and you can see all their wins. One of the things why they have more wins than when we get to the Browns, remember I talked about Bill DeWitt being the architect of this 4Fs and other things, of grabbing guys. The Cardinals really didn't lose anyone. I don't know if they were paying off senators or what, but they really didn't lose any guys except for Enos Slaughter. They pretty much kept their core all 3 of those years. And they're going to win again in 1946. Somebody said, well, what happened to 45? Stan went in the Navy. That's the simple answer. So there's not much you can say bad about the Cardinals, except they were pretty good, great. So then the Browns, they don't have the smiles, they got the stares, right? it's a good team. It's not a great team. It's not going to have the superstars. We'll put this out here. Do you recognize any names? They don't come to your head unless you're, a Brownie fan that you stored. Luke Sewell's the manager over here. Denny Galehouse, Nels Potter, Jack Kramer pitchers. An outfield of Labes, Krivich, and Moore. They don't ring any bells. Labes, his one game spectacular, the last game of the season. But there's not a lot there. But they were the best of the 4 Fs, you might say, across Major League. People like to give them an asterisk. Well, it was wartime baseball, and they were playing before. Everybody else could do it, but DeWitt did it better. This was their first and would be their only pennant. Their record was 89-65. That might even be better than the Cardinals this year. They won on the last day of the season, and it would have been a potential tie with the Detroit Tigers. And a week earlier, it would have been a 3-way tie with the Yankees, who folded in the last week because the Browns beat them. And you can see some of the letters in the middle of the room over there from Major League Baseball talking about all these ties and how it would go. The Browns' attendance was over 500,000, more than the Cardinals. The Browns were like a blue-collar team. The Cardinals were more of a white-collar team. And people were really rallying, loving this team, the Browns. And it showed. And even Stan Musial talked about it in some of the interviews at the World Series. I don't get it. It's third year. We're the best. But they're rooting for the other guys. You know how weird it is to be coming to the plate in Sportsman's Park and have everybody rooting for the other team? So there's no future Hall of Famers on the Browns. Mike Krivich from Mount Olive, Illinois, he's the only guy who hit over 300. He hit 301. Vern Stevens was the power, 20 homers, 109 RBIs. Nels Potter, 19. Kramer, 17. You can see the pictures there. So anyway, it doesn't matter. They won. As bad as you get, you can win. But the Browns, the Cardinals are going to win huge. With their 105 wins, they knew in September they were back in the pennant. The Browns had to come down. They trailed coming into the last week of the season. The last week of the season, they trailed the Tigers by a game going into that final weekend. The Browns had a 4-game series with the Yankees. Now, do you get a lot of really feel-good feeling if you got to win the pennant, you got to play the Yankees? No. The Tigers, meanwhile, have to play 4 games against the last place lowly Senators. Tigers were pretty confident they were winning. They were already booking their trips and everything for the World Series. And on Friday, this big storm came across the country, and all the games were rained out from Friday night. So Saturday's doubleheaders for both. The Browns sweep the Yankees. Pretty impressive. The Tigers split. Now they're tied. Saturday night, they're tied. Sunday morning, who wins? Who's going to win? It all comes down to that final game of the season. Remember in 1922, the Browns lost the final game and they lost by a game winning the pennant. But, as Harry Carey would say, Browns win, Browns win. What happened? The Senators beat the overconfident Tigers 4-1. The Browns actually know the Senators have won as the game is underway here in St. Louis. Could the Browns win it all? Sig Jakuki takes the mound. There's old Sig right there. Sig was known to love the bottle, you might say. They actually had guys outside his room to make sure he didn't sneak out the night before this big game. But somehow he woke up feeling pretty good the next morning and big smile. He said it relaxed him. How he got it, still a mystery to today. And the Yankees actually take a 2-0 lead. But here, this man up here, Chet Labes, I talked about the left fielder. He's the hero of the day. He hits a 2-run homer in the 4th and a 2-run homer in the 5th. Bird Stevens hits one in the 8th. Browns win the pennant 5-2. Donald Barnes is the manager. The owner of the Browns. He's congratulating Sig Jakuki and the team in the locker room. So, all games are going to be played in Sportsman's Park. It only happened two other instances. In 1921 and 22, the Yankees had moved from Baltimore, and they had played in the Polo Grounds in all those years with the Browns, and Yankee Stadium would be built in 1923. So when the Yankees played and Giants met in 21 and 22, they played all games in the Polo Grounds. Here, the same teams are all going to play both teams are going to play in the same stadium. Now, some people like to throw in the COVID, was it the 2020 World Series when they all played in the same stadium without the people. It wasn't the hometown city. So they're all going to go there, and they're going to go back to 2-3-2 games like we know today, because those first 2 years of the war, they did 3 and 4 relations just to limit the travel. And because there's no travel in St. Louis, they're all going to be played on consecutive days. But that wasn't what the real first big volley and controversy of the series is going to be. Here you can see a young Senator Harry S. Truman from Missouri. He's out on the campaign trail because 1944 was an election year. He's running for vice president. Okay? And in about a month, he's going to win and become Franklin Roosevelt's vice president. And a few months after that, he's going to become president because Roosevelt's going to die. So here he is with Luke Sewell, the manager of the Browns, and Billy Southworth, the manager of the Cardinals. Well, controversy. Remember how we talked about why the field was, one's gone, one's playing? These two gentlemen said, you know what? Money's tough. Half the time you're on the road and I'm home. Well, I'm on the road, you're home. They shared an apartment in the Lindell Towers, just up the street. Now we got a problem. They're all home. St. Louis versus St. Louis. Who gets to live in the apartment with their family during the World Series? That was one of the biggest controversies in the newspaper in those early days leading up at the start of the game of the World Series. Who gets the apartment? Sewell, they would say, wins the coin toss. He gets it. Another tenant of the Lindell Towers lets Billy Southworth and his family all stay there. So it was just kind of an interesting. These are the programs. The Browns had a cool program. The Cardinals was kind of blah. Not very exciting. Busch Stadium, Sportsman's Park right there. Crowds just packed the place. Game 1, you can read some of these things and information we got out there. It was October 4th. Attendance, 33,000. Game time, 2 hours and 5 minutes. A World Series today is 4 hours, at least. The Cardinals were the home team. The Browns were the visitors. So people ask, well, did they trade dugouts or how did it go? See, in Sportsman's Park, the hometown dugout was third base. Because it was through third base you get into the tunnel and then up to there was the concourse where the concessions are. Andy Fran guys, remember Andy Fran guys in their uniforms? They would put their arms out so the players could go up, because they had to go up steps because the locker rooms were upstairs. So even the visitors had to go through there. So you didn't want to get mad with the Cardinals because there's been fights that took place when they would have to go through the dugout to get to the concourse. But anyway, Browns are the visitors. They're over on first base. Cardinals, home, they're on third base. Denny Galehouse became the pitcher with the worst winning percentage to start a World Series game until John Matlack with the Mets in '73. Galehouse does outpitch the former MVP, Mort Cooper, even though Cooper only allowed 2 hits. The Browns only had 2 hits. One of them was George McQuinn. He gets the 2-run homer. Galehouse holds the Cardinals to just 1 run. And the Browns have won. They're in the World Series. They win their first game. It's looking up on the Browns. But it set the tone for the World Series in strikeouts. The Browns struck out 6 times. The Cardinals did the same 5 times. Notice that as I show these slides because it set a record for most strikeouts in a World Series. And you can see McQuinn's homers and the crew of the Browns there. Tuesday, here we go, buddy. Nels Potter. Game 2, 35,000. 2 hours and 32 minutes. That was because it was an 11-inning game. What happened, and what could have been? The history of the Browns, subtitle, what could have been? What could have been if Branch Rickey stayed there with the Browns. A bunch of others we won't go into today. There's somebody wrote a book about this you can find out or watch a movie, but there's all these what could have been. But there was one misplay that changed the Browns' destiny. Nels Potter, the gentleman pointed out, he was the pitcher from here. In a scoreless game, Amo Verbin, he's on base with a single in the third inning. Max Lanier, the pitcher, bunts. Nels Potter comes running in, throws the ball all the way down into the right field corner. Verbin comes around, scored, what should have been the end of the inning leads to the Cardinals taking the lead and not giving up. They take the lead. Cardinals will win the game. Instead of it being potentially a 2-0 game, because the Browns tied it and could have gone to lead, the Cardinals win. And it's a split. Now they're at one game apiece. The Browns committed 4 errors and struck out 13 times. The Cardinals struck out 7. Browns made a lot of errors. This play had 2 errors on it because when the throw came in, it caused an additional error. But it was a bunt play that Potter picked it up and threw it into. So instead of going into game 3 up 2-0, they come in and they play a game in 2 hours, 19 minutes. Jack Kramer will win it for the Browns, 6-2. It would be 60 years before a team ever came back from being down 3 games to none in the World Series. Kramer struck out 10 Cardinals. The Cardinals got a run in the first on an error, but the Browns came back with 4 in the third. Cardinals will win. Browns commit 2 more errors, struck out 5 times. The Cardinals whiffed 10, as we said. This is it. This game is the high water mark of the whole franchise. They could have been up 3-0. They're up 2-1. They won't win again. And that's the history of the St. Louis Browns. Game 4, old Stan the Man comes through. It's a rematch. I mean, Harry Brackeen he comes through, the lefty, the cat, as they called him. And the Cardinals show why they were a three-peat of the team, why they would win over 105 games in a row. They woke up, and their depth took over. The interesting thing about this, Stan Musial right there, that's the only World Series homer he would have in his 4 World Series. That's the only one. In the 4th inning there, he got the Cardinals, I said 4th inning, I mean it's the 1st inning. He got the Cardinals up and never looking back. And there were more errors and there were more strikeouts. Instead of being up 3-1, it's now 2-2. Wins for each team. Game 5, it's a repeat of Galehouse and Mort Cooper of Game 1. Remember, Cooper only gave up 2 hits, struck out 10 Browns. This time he strikes out 12 Browns, and he got payback. Cardinals win 2-0 in a shutout by Cooper. Cardinals got 2 home runs, one by Ray Sanders and the other by Danny Litweiler, and now it's looking like a 3-1. Can the Browns come back? People just see the envious. This is Game 6, even though the ticket stub says X. They had a different scenario for Game 6 and 7. So if you're looking for that winning ticket, it's Game X. And even the attendance dropped down to 31 because people said, that's it. The Browns actually took a 1-0 lead on McQuinn's RBI. Cardinals came back with 3 runs on help of an error by Vern Stevens, and Ted Wilkes relieved Max Lanier and took it all the way. In the end, the Browns booted the ball 2 more times, struck out 9 times. The Cardinals whiffed 5. Set a record over here. When Mike Shatak whiffs for the 92nd time combined in the World Series, that is a record as he ended the game, appropriately with a strikeout. So, just a few tidbits as we wind down. This is the 3rd time, as I said, when the series was played in one stadium. for the home teams. The weather of the series was colder than normal for an October, a little cooler. Tickets range from $7.50 to $1.25 for a bleacher seat. Is that a bargain today? There's no ticket specifically marked 6. It's the X game. 15 series records were set and 10 were tied. There were no stolen bases. Can you believe that? You got a team named the Swifties and nobody steals a base. Cardinal pitchers struck out 49 Browns, a record that lasted until the 1980 Phillies. And again, this was in a 6-game series. They combined 92 strikeouts on the two teams. It's only been exceeded once, and that was in a 7-game series. Many believe the high strikeout rate was they opened up center field bleachers for the series. And in those days, everybody wore white shirts, right? White long-sleeve shirts, and they were having difficulty picking up the ball. The Browns' 183 batting average was the second lowest next to the 1911 Giants. McQuinn led the Browns in hitting at 438, led both teams. Emil Verben got 412. Musial, he had a paltry 304, plus his key home run. Cardinal players received $4,600. The Browns received $2,400 for winning. Bobby Scanlon and the Bat Boys. You can read a story in there about the Bat Boys actually would do both teams, and they got a little bit from each and made about as much as the Browns. So, to finish it up, in the end, what did it mean? Well, the Cardinals aren't going to win in 1945. They're going to come in second, 3 games behind with a record of 95 and 59. As I said, Stan was in the Navy in 45. But they kept adding flags as soon as he came back in 46, and then they went on in 64, 67, 68, 82, 85, 87, 04, 06, 11, and 13, and no more for the Browns. They finished 81 and 70 in 1945, third place, 6 games back. They went into the season thinking they were going to win. They went in really believing they could win again. They were going to learn. They were going to be veterans. And World War II was still going on in the 1945 season. And you just help. But this guy here, very interesting. Pete Gray, the one-arm player. Now, Pete, we can misjudge him, but Pete earned a shot. He had been the MVP of the Sally League. He led in hits, he led in stolen bases and things of that nature. And they gave him his chance. Muckerman and Barnes have a fight about this, and Barnes sells his share of the teams to Muckerman, his partner in the owner, because the players started, this guy's a joke. He wasn't really a joke. He could play, but I'm here to tell you, the difference between major league pitching and minor league pitching is dramatic. Ask Jordan Walker. And I say that with Jordan Walker, not to be anything against Jordan Walker. He's got holes in his swing. Ricky Horton and I talked about this last time. He's got holes in his swing, and major league pitchers can do that. And they can get him on those holes. Minor league pitchers, not so much. They can't do it 100% of the time. Same thing with Pete Gray. He could hit the minors, and he hit really well. But the major league pitchers figured out where those holes were, and he couldn't adjust with just one arm. And so there was dissension, and all of a sudden they're trading Mike Krivich and some of the players away from the Browns because of the infighting coming because of Pete Gray on the team. On the other hand, Pete Gray became a model for many, many people. Think about all the soldiers who were wounded and maimed, and they came back to St. Louis or wherever and played. They watched Pete Gray. This guy made it to the majors. Look, I don't want to hear anything. I can't do this or that. One arm, he makes it to the majors. And if you saw one of my PBS films where I have a gentleman who he grew up with like a polio-type leg and leg problem, his dad would bring him to Browns game and say, watch this guy here. And I don't want to hear anything. This guy made it to the majors. Don't tell me you can't do this or that because you got this leg. And he said that became his goal. So sometimes Pete Gray is misunderstood, and I got to stick up for him, even though he had a chip on his shoulder about a lot of things. But the key is they didn't repeat in 45, and from then on, It was all downhill to 1953 when they wrapped up their season here in Sportsman's Park and moved up to Nancy's dad in Baltimore.